Was any consideration given to additional sanctions on those two countries, and also possibly excluding Russia from membership of the G20?
I say to my honourable friend, the G20 is not like the G7. It's a broader grouping of countries that works by consensus, so it is not possible to expel Russia in the same way. But what he will take comfort from is that we use the opportunity to unequivocally condemn Russia's actions. With regard to sanctions on Iran and others, he will know or may be aware that we have recently imposed new sanctions on Iran, but related specifically to their treatment of protesters in the recent demonstrations. It's the right thing to do. The behaviour of the Iranian regime is not acceptable, and we should hold them to account for it.
Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. Facing the worst drought in 40 years, tens of millions of people in East Africa are going hungry. Children are dying today of malnutrition, and the United Nations expects a famine to be declared before the end of the year. While recognising the humanitarian aid that the UK has already given, does the Prime Minister recognise that the international community now needs to do more to save lives and not wait for that formal declaration of famine?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, the UK is already tackling this issue head-on. At UNGA, we announced funding in particular for famine support in Somalia, and our work on helping to secure an extension to the Black Sea Grain Initiative will make an enormous difference to the people that he rightly cares about, as do I. But I'd also let him know that countries in Africa were very pleased by our commitment to the Global Fund, because they know that will also help alleviate some of the difficulties that they're facing.
Siobhan Bailey.
Deputy Speaker, multinationalism has never been more important given current global pressures and threats, not least in protecting the people of Ukraine. But despite Twitter mainly having a meltdown over flowery shirts, as this was his first G20 as Prime Minister, can my right honourable friend tell us how useful he found the meeting for relationship building and consolidating joint international working?
Well, I could say to my honourable friend, of course these summits are helpful in coordinating global action on tackling challenges like inflation or indeed supporting Ukraine. But it's also helpful in building those relationships with foreign leaders that can deliver tangible benefit for people here at home. Most recently, we've seen that given the dialogue we are now having with President Macron, the French, that's led to a new deal to help us tackle illegal migration. That's an example of why these dialogues and summits matter, but it's delivering real change for people here at home.
Matt Bradshaw.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And further to his replies about our relationship with India, why are Britons alone in Europe currently excluded from the Indian e-visa scheme, which is doing more damage to our hard-pressed travel and tourism sector and extreme inconvenience for British families who want to visit relatives in India in the months to come? Did his discussions with Prime Minister Modi give him any hope that this ban might be lifted any time soon?
I can tell my honourable friend it is something that we discussed and raised. Of course, I would like to see the United Kingdom included on the e-visa scheme, and he can rest assured that we'll continue to raise it with our Indian counterparts.
Shailesh Vora.
Speaker, would my right honourable friend confirm that in his conversations with President Biden of the US and his counterparts in the EU, he has made it absolutely clear the UK's intention to preserve the integrity of the Good Friday Agreement? And would he also confirm that in so doing, it is not unreasonable for the UK, an independent and sovereign nation, to be able to maintain its own economic integrity?
I can give my right honourable friend that assurance. Of course, the territorial integrity of the United Kingdom is important and must be preserved, and that is under some stress, as we have seen in Northern Ireland, that he knows very well from his previous role. And he has my commitment to the Good Friday Agreement, something that I discussed not only with our European counterparts, but also the President. We remain committed to delivering all strands of that agreement, and that's what I will work tirelessly to do.
Patrick Grady.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Were there any discussions at the G20 about the situation in Iran? I've heard from a lot of constituents who want to express their solidarity with the protesters and their outrage at the way the regime is cracking down on them. So what steps can the G20 take to support progress towards stability and democracy in Iran?
Well, the protests send a clear message that the Iranian people are not satisfied with the path that their government has taken. As I was mentioning, we have now sanctioned 24 extra people, both political and security officials, for their role in the crackdown on protesters, and my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, recently summoned Iran's most senior diplomat in the UK to make clear that we do not tolerate threats to life and intimidation of any kind.
Sir Christopher Chu.
Madam Deputy Speaker, does my right honourable friend agree that Putin was emboldened to attack Ukraine by the continuous appeasement of Western democracies over many years? And why does he not think that a similar appeasement of the Chinese dictatorship will not result in a similar disaster?
So I'd just say to my honourable friend that our approach to China is in complete alignment with the United States, with Canada, on Australia. It is one that is absolutely clear-eyed about the challenges that China poses to our values and to our interests and to our economic security, and that's why it's right that we take robust action to defend ourselves against that, as we saw just yesterday with the decision on Chinese investment in a sensitive industry in this country.
Dame Diana Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. One of the key global challenges facing the G20 is migration and refugees. And I know this country has a proud history of fulfilling our international obligations to the most vulnerable, including children. So could the Prime Minister just confirm that no unaccompanied asylum-seeking children under the age of 8 are currently being held at Manston? And if he doesn't know the answer, could he write to me as a matter of urgency? Thank you.
I'll be happy to write to the right honourable lady. She'll know well that we have different processes and procedures in place for unaccompanied asylum-seeking children to make sure that they get extra safeguarding protection as they rightly are due, and I'll get back to her with an update on where we are.
Robbie Moore.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Russian attacks on Ukrainian energy infrastructure in recent weeks just show the full extent of Putin's complete desperation. So can the Prime Minister confirm that the UK is providing Ukraine with the energy equipment and the support that they need to help repair their infrastructure so that they can keep their lights on and their heat coming in the months ahead?
My honourable friend is absolutely right to raise this particular need of the Ukrainians. It's something that I've discussed a couple of times with President Zelensky, and I can assure him and the House that we are playing our part in providing funding and expertise to help resolve some of the issues, and the Ukrainians, I know, are very grateful for that support.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The G20 communiqué urged all parties to finalise and adopt the forthcoming COP15 Global Biodiversity Framework in Montreal. At this crisis time for nature, both globally and at home, he'll know the importance of leading by example. So as well as accelerating the UK's domestic environmental agenda, will he ensure that he's not forced into another last-minute U-turn, as we saw ahead of COP26? Will he commit now to attending COP15 in person and show that leadership?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I don't think anyone can doubt our commitment to biodiversity and nature. It was something that the United Kingdom proudly led at Glasgow last year to put it on the agenda. We'll have a range of different people attending Montreal, but I was very pleased that we ensured that the G20 communiqué reaffirmed the G20's commitment to the targets that were set at COP. That was something that we fought very hard for, and we should all rightly be proud that it is there in the G20 communiqué.
Roman Chishti.
Speaker, can I ask the Prime Minister a specific question with regards to the conversation he had with Prime Minister Tusk?
Energy Charter Treaty, or does he put fossil fuel profits ahead of climate change? And will he raise this within WTO reform?
Well, the Honourable Gentleman mentioned a range of other countries in regard to fossil fuels. Actually, it was the United Kingdom who led through COP last year in making sure that we end the climate finance for coal plants, something that actually other countries do need to catch up with us on, and we will continue to champion that in all these forums because that's the right thing to do, and it was a commitment we made at Glasgow that needs to be upheld.
Richard Drax.
Madam Deputy Speaker, having just returned from Ukraine myself with the Defence Committee, along with my right honourable friend, can I tell the House how movingly grateful they are to all the support we give, and in particular to my right honourable friend for his outstanding leadership of this country fighting this Russian aggression. However, there are shortages of food, ammunition and military equipment, and while we in the United States are doing our bit, there is concern that other countries are not. can my right honourable friend inform the House, during the G19 or G20 meeting, did he have any feedback from other countries that they're going to step up to the plate like ourselves and the Americans are doing?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right about the need to continue supporting Ukraine for as long as it takes. That remains a feature of all our conversations with allies. There's lots of different ways people can play their part. For example, as I mentioned, the Canadians recently extending their support for training Ukrainians here. But he's right that we need to keep up the pressure. The UK has shown great leadership on this alongside America, and we will jointly encourage others to follow our lead and what happens.
Barry Gardner.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. When the Prime Minister met with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman earlier this week, did he challenge him on the way in which Saudi Arabia has been blocking the proposal at COP27 for the phase down of all fossil fuels?
Madam Deputy Speaker, we had a wide-ranging conversation on a range of topics, including climate change. We are very much committed to our obligations under the COP agreement, and we very much welcome Saudi Arabia's commitment to be net zero by 2060. There's lots of different opportunities for them to play their part as COP presidents coming up, and we will look forward to supporting them in that endeavour.
Ruth Edwards.
The last few years have shown us the importance of resilient supply chains. Can my right honourable friend confirm that a priority for his discussions with allies at the G20 was decoupling our supply chains from authoritarian regimes in key areas such as critical minerals and products like semiconductors?
My honourable friend makes an excellent point, and I'm pleased to tell her that just yesterday the Business Secretary made a decision with regard to semiconductors which should give her and others confidence that we take this incredibly seriously. I discussed critical minerals with many of our allies around the world, and I'm pleased to say that Japan, with their G7 presidency next year, will put economic security at the heart of our collective agenda.
Kevin Brennan.
Deputy Speaker, on Northern Ireland, it's reported today in the Times that the Prime Minister promised President Biden that the issues surrounding the Northern Ireland Protocol would be solved by next April. Was that a commitment that he gave to President Biden? And with a long, hard winter facing the people of Northern Ireland without a government there in place, shouldn't there be a greater sense of urgency from the UK government to sort this out?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, as I've said actually publicly and clearly, I want to see a resolution to this issue as soon as possible. It's why I spoke to my counterparts in Ireland, the European Commission and others almost the first day I took office, and I'm working very hard to try and bring about a negotiated settlement to the challenges we face. But those challenges on the ground are real. Businesses, families, communities are suffering as a result of the protocol. I've made that point loudly and clearly to all our counterparts, and I've urged them to show flexibility and pragmatism in their response so we can get the situation resolved on the ground and get the executive back up and running, because that's what the people of Northern Ireland deserve.
Richard Graham.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I congratulate G20 and its chair on their final communique with unanimous condemnation of the continued invasion of Ukraine, and the Prime Minister and other Western leaders on their work to de-escalate tensions between the West and China. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that apart from the important work that he is doing multilaterally in the TPP and bilaterally with India on the FTA, there are also other bilateral opportunities with leading Asian countries? And will he encourage their heads of government to do working visits to the UK?
Yes. I absolutely will do that, and can I also congratulate my honourable friend on his reappointment as a trade envoy to Indonesia.
To the defence of Ukraine and the rule of law. But my right honourable friend will know that key to that last element is the work of the International Criminal Court, which launched its investigation into war crimes in March, with an aspiration to issue an indictment by the end of the year. Can he confirm that the UK will continue to do all it can to support their work, including the difficult task that lies ahead of obtaining custody of Russian military generals to stand trial?
Well, obviously this is an area my honourable friend knows well, and she's right to highlight it. I'm pleased to tell her the United Kingdom was out in front in providing both technical and financial resources to the efforts to gather the evidence, and I know the Justice Secretary is in touch with the British prosecutor as well, and the team will have our full support.
Alison Tulis.
Madam Deputy Speaker. When the Prime Minister met with Prime Minister Modi, did he raise the case of Jagtar Singh Johal, who today has been held in arbitrary detention for 1,840 days? The Sikh community in Scotland are incredibly concerned about this situation. So was it just handshakes and Instagram photographs, or did he raise this case?
Madam Deputy Speaker, we've consistently raised our concerns about Mr Jahal's case directly with all levels of the Indian government. I discussed more generally the issues around extradition with Prime Minister Modi, and the Foreign Secretary raised this case with India's Minister of External Affairs just last month on his visit to India.
Mr Mayhew.
Made reference to the dangers of debt traps for emerging economies. Can he give further information on what steps the United Kingdom has taken to provide emerging economies with alternatives to Chinese money?
Well, my honourable friend is right to highlight the need for sensible alternatives. We tend to work not just bilaterally but also multilaterally through things like SDR recycling at the IMF. The new Resilience and Sustainability Trust that was established was done so with UK leadership, and indeed the new Debt Service Suspension Initiative is something that I championed as Chancellor, and we need to make sure that we deliver on it.
Toby Perkins.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Prime Minister laid out his approach to trade deals in his statement. He will be aware that while he was there, the Right Honourable Member for Camborne and Redruth was describing the trade deal with Australia as not a very good deal for the United Kingdom. Does the Prime Minister agree with the Right Honourable Member, who was formerly the Environment Secretary, and if so, what's he going to do about it?
Before the Prime Minister attempts to answer the question, there's far too much noise in the chamber. I mean, you would think that people were anticipating something happening and chatting amongst themselves instead of giving their full attention to the important answers the Prime Minister is giving to important questions. Prime Minister Tony Lloyd.
Madam Deputy Speaker, it's not so many months ago that any international conference like the G20 would have been seized with the situation in Afghanistan. Afghanistan has now gone off the agenda, but the humanitarian crisis there is one that is moving into absolute tragedy as people are facing starvation. Can the Prime Minister tell us what conversations did take place about Afghanistan, or in any case, will he now reconvene the kind of donor conference that could make a material difference to starvation in that country?
My honourable friend is right to highlight that Afghanistan continues to experience one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. That's why earlier this year we co-hosted a UN pledging summit together with Germany and Qatar that helped raise over $2 billion for Afghanistan. But he's right to put it on the agenda, and I'll make sure that we continue to do what we can to support the people there.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. A free trade deal with India is a tremendous opportunity for both the United Kingdom and India. And I agree with my right honourable friend, we should not sacrifice quality at the expense of doing a deal quickly. However, during his discussions with Prime Minister Narendra Modi,
further support we can provide to Rohingya refugees, who are the largest refugee camp in the world, and one of great concern for my constituents.
Well, I know this is an issue of concern for my honourable friend, and it's right that he raises it and champions the case. I'm pleased to tell him that we have sanctioned those people responsible, and we will continue to make sure that we can provide whatever support we can to the people who need our help.
John Trickett. Grateful, Mr. Speaker. In the communique from the G20, the words food supply, or food scarcity are mentioned 54 separate times. And it's good that Britain's taking part of a global community's fight to make sure that food is properly distributed. But last year, before the Ukraine war, 1 in 9 Britons were driven to use a food bank. Isn't it clear it wasn't disruption of food?
Considered and protected as negotiations continue.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I stand by our commitment not to compromise the United Kingdom's high environmental, animal welfare and food safety standards, and will ensure that our trade deals open up new markets for British farmers.
Luke Evans.
The cost of living in the UK is going up mainly because
of the war that Russia is purporting. But it's not just affecting us, it's affecting the EU zone, which has inflation as an average of 10%. So what discussions did the Prime Minister have about a strategy at the G20 to deal with inflation, which is clearly a worldwide problem?
My honourable friend is absolutely right to highlight the global nature of these challenges that we are facing, in part caused by Russia's aggression. The G20 communique is clear on responsibility of individual countries to ensure financial stability, and as it says, that means delivering long-term fiscal sustainability, and that's what this Chancellor will deliver.
Jim Shannon. Mr. Speaker, can I thank the Prime Minister very much for his statement and for his strong stance on behalf of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. We thank you for that. The actions of Putin and his regime have driven 2/3 of the G20 countries into economic distress, raised inflation for us in this country by 10 to 11%, and talk of a recession are prevalent for many countries. Russia is the enemy within in the G20. What is the Prime Minister doing to align with all other G20 countries to ostracise Russia and to reduce their influence and indeed, if possible, their very membership of the G20?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it is not possible in a consensual organisation to expel Russia, but I'm pleased to say to the honourable gentleman that we work closely with all partners across the G20 to deliver a strong, unified message that the threat and use of nuclear weapons is inadmissible, and today's era must not be the era for war. I think Russia heard that message loud and clear.
Baron Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I share my right honourable friend's view that China presents a systemic challenge to the West. We've just seen in Russia how an authoritarian action can use their role in our supply chains to do damage to the global economy. So can my right honourable friend confirm that when we do engage with China on global issues like climate change or public health, he'll never do so at the expense of our national or economic security?
I can absolutely give my honourable friend that assurance. We will always be robust in defending our values and our interests, and that starts with our national security.
Joe Morrow, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, to make a statement. Jeremy Hunt.
Mr. Speaker, in the face of unprecedented global headwinds, families, pensioners, businesses, teachers, nurses and many others are worried about the future. So today we deliver a plan to tackle the cost of living crisis and rebuild our economy. Our priorities are stability, growth and public services. We also protect the vulnerable, because to be British is to be compassionate, and this is a compassionate Conservative government. We are not alone in facing these problems, but today we respond to an international crisis with British values. We are honest about the challenges and we are fair in our solutions. Yes, we take difficult decisions to tackle inflation and keep mortgage rates down. But our plan also leads to a shallower downturn, lower energy bills, higher growth, and a stronger NHS and education system. Three priorities then today: stability, growth, and public services. I start with stability. Mr. Speaker, high inflation is the enemy of stability. It means higher mortgage rates, more expensive food and fuel bills, businesses failing and unemployment rising. It erodes savings, causes industrial unrest and cuts funding for public services. It hurts the poorest the most and eats away at the trust upon which a strong society is built. The Office for Budget Responsibility confirms global factors are the primary cause of current inflation. Most countries are still dealing with the fallout from a once-in-a-century pandemic. The furlough scheme, the vaccine rollout and the response of the NHS did our country proud, but they all have to be paid for. The lasting impact on supply chains has made goods more expensive and fuelled inflation, and this has been worsened by a made-in-Russia energy crisis. Putin's war in Ukraine
has caused wholesale gas and electricity prices to rise to 8 times their historic average. Inflation is high here, but higher in Germany, the Netherlands and Italy. Interest rates have risen here, but faster in the US, Canada and New Zealand. Growth forecasts have fallen here, but fallen further in Germany. The International Monetary Fund expects 1/3 of the world's economy to be in recession this year or next. So the Bank of England, which has done an outstanding job since its independence, now has my wholehearted support in its mission to defeat inflation, and I today confirm we will not change its remit. But we need fiscal and monetary policy to work together, and that means the government and the bank working in lockstep. It means, in particular, giving the world confidence in our ability to pay our debts. British families make sacrifices every day to live within their means, and so too must their government, because the United Kingdom will always pay its way. I understand the motivation of my predecessor's mini-budget, and he was correct. He was correct to identify growth as a priority. But unfunded tax cuts are as risky as unfunded spending, which is why we reversed the planned measures. As a result, government borrowing has fallen, the pound has strengthened, and the OBR says today that the lower interest rates generated by the government's actions are already benefiting our economy and public finances. But, Mr. Speaker, credibility cannot be taken for granted. And yesterday's inflation figures show we must continue a relentless fight to bring it down, including a rock-solid commitment to rebuild our public finances. Richard Hughes and his team at the OBR today lay out starkly the impact of global headwinds on the UK economy, and I'm enormously grateful to him and his team for their thorough work. The OBR forecast the UK's inflation rate to be 9.1% this year and 7.4% next year. They confirm that our actions today help inflation to fall sharply from the middle of next year. They also judge that the UK, like other countries, is now in recession. Overall this year, the economy is still forecast to grow by 4.2%. GDP then falls in 2023 by 1.4%, before rising by 1.3%, 2.6% and 2.7% in the following 3 years. The OBR says higher energy prices explain the majority of the downward revision in cumulative growth since March. They also expect a rise in unemployment from 3.6% today to 4.9% in 2024, before falling to 4.1%. Today's decisions mean that over the next 5 years, borrowing is more than halved. This year we're forecast to borrow 7.1% of GDP, or £177 billion. Next year, 5.5% of GDP, or £140 billion. Then by 2027-28, it falls to 2.4% of GDP, or £69 billion. As a result, underlying debt as a percentage of GDP starts to fall from a peak of 97.6% in 2025-6 to 97.3% in 27-28. I also confirmed 2 new fiscal rules. The first is that underlying debt must fall as a percentage of GDP by the 5th year of a rolling 5-year period. The second, that public sector borrowing over the same period must be below 3% of GDP. And the plan I'm announcing today meets both rules. Today's statement delivers a consolidation of £55 billion and means inflation and interest rates end up significantly lower. We achieve this, Mr. Speaker, in a balanced way. In the short term, as growth slows and unemployment rises, we will use fiscal policy to support the economy. The OBR confirm that because of our plans, the recession is shallower and inflation is reduced. Unemployment is also lower, with about 70,000 jobs saved as a result of our decisions today. Then, once growth returns, we increase the pace of consolidation to get debt falling, This further reduces the pressure on the bank to raise interest rates, because as Conservatives, we do not leave our debts to the next generation. So, Mr. Speaker, this is a balanced path. We have not raised headline rates of taxation, and tax as a percentage of GDP will increase by just 1% over the next 5 years. I start with personal taxes. Asking more from those who have more means that the first difficult decision I take on tax is to reduce the threshold at which the 45p rate becomes payable from £150,000 to £125,140. Those earning £150,000 or more will pay just over £1,200 more in tax every year. We're also taking difficult decisions on tax-free allowances. I'm maintaining at current levels the income tax personal allowance, higher rate threshold, main national insurance thresholds and the inheritance tax thresholds for a further 2 years, taking us to April 2028. Even after that, we'll still have the most generous set of tax-free allowances of any G7 country. I'm also reforming allowances on unearned income. The dividend allowance will be cut from £2,000 to £1,000 next year and then to £500 from April 24. The annual exempt amount for capital gains tax will be cut from £12,300 to £6,000 next year and then £3,000 from April 24. These changes still leave us with more generous allowances than countries like Germany, Ireland, France and Canada. Because the OBR forecast half of all new vehicles will be electric by 2025, to make our motoring tax system fairer, I've decided that from then, electric vehicles will no longer be exempt from vehicle excise duty. Company car tax rates will remain lower for electric vehicles, and I've listened to industry bodies and will limit rate increases to 1 percentage point a year for 3 years from 2025. The OBR expects housing activity to slow over the next 2 years, so the stamp duty cuts announced in the mini-budget will remain in place, but only until the 31st of March 2025. After that, I will sunset the measure, creating an incentive to support the housing market and the jobs associated with it by boosting transaction during the period the economy most needs it. I now turn to business taxes. While I've decided to freeze the employer's NICS threshold until April 2028, we will retain the employment allowance at its new higher level of £5,000. This means 40% of all businesses will pay no NICS at all. The VAT threshold is already more than twice as high as the EU and OECD averages. I will maintain it at that level until March 26. My Right Honourable friend the Prime Minister successfully negotiated a landmark international tax deal to make sure multinational corporations, including big tech companies, pay the right tax in the countries they operate. I will implement these reforms, making sure the UK gets our fair share. Yeah. Alongside further measures to tackle tax avoidance and evasion, this will raise an additional £2.8 billion by 27-28. I've also heard concerning reports of abuse and fraud in R&D tax relief for SMEs, so I've decided today to cut the deduction rate for the SME scheme to 86% and the credit rate to 10%, but increase the rate of the separate R&D expenditure credit from 13% to 20%. Despite raising revenue, the OBR have confirmed that these measures have no detrimental impact on the level of R&D investment in the economy. Ahead of the next budget, we'll work with industry to understand what further support R&D intensive SMEs may require. Next, windfall taxes. I have no objection to windfall taxes if they are genuinely about windfall profits caused by unexpected increases in energy prices. But I know the honourable members opposite are getting excited at the talk of windfall taxes. Can I just say that any such tax should be temporary, not deter investment, and recognise the cyclical nature of energy businesses. So, taking account of this, I've decided that from January the 1st until March 28, we will increase the energy profits levy from 25 to 35%. The structure of our energy market also creates windfall profits for low-carbon electricity generation. So from January the 1st, we've decided to introduce a new temporary 45% levy on electricity generators. Together, these measures raise £14 billion next year. Finally, I turn to business rates. It's an important principle that bills should accurately reflect market values. So we'll proceed with the revaluation of business properties from April 23. But I will soften the blow on businesses with a nearly £14 billion tax cut over the next 5 years. Nearly 2/3 of properties will not pay a penny more next year, and thousands of pubs, restaurants and small high street shops will benefit. This will include a new government-funded transitional relief scheme, as called for by the CBI, the British Retail Consortium, the Federation of Small Businesses and others, benefiting around 700,000 businesses. Mr. Speaker, our plan for the cost of living delivers lower inflation, lower mortgage rates, a shallower downturn and lower unemployment. But it also involves public spending discipline. So I turn next to how we protect public services through a challenging period. The Prime Minister's vision for this country has at its heart a strong NHS and world-class education. We know that a strong economy depends on strong public services, so we will protect them as much as we can as we deliver our plan for stability and growth. We do have to take difficult decisions on public finances, so we're going to grow public spending, but we're going to grow it more slowly than the growth in the economy. For the remaining 2 years of the spending review, we'll protect the increases in departmental budgets we've already set out in cash terms, and then grow resource spending at 1% a year in real terms in the 3 years that follow. Although departments will have to make efficiencies to deal with inflationary pressures in the next 2 years, this decision means overall spending in public services will continue to rise in real terms for the next 5 years. Before I turn to our plan for schools and the NHS, I start with 2 other areas of spending. The Department for Work and Pensions has a critical role in supporting people into work, and I am proud to live in a country with one of the most comprehensive safety nets anywhere in the world. But I am also concerned that we've seen a sharp increase in economically inactive working-age adults of around 630,000 people since the start of the pandemic. Employment levels have yet to return to pre-pandemic levels, which is bad for businesses who cannot fill vacancies and bad for people missing out on the opportunity to do well for themselves and their families. So the Prime Minister has asked the Work and Pensions Secretary to do a thorough review of issues holding back workforce participation in freedom. Alongside them, I salute the citizens of another country right on the front line of that fight today, the brave people of Ukraine. The United Kingdom has given their military support worth £2.3 billion since the start of Putin's invasion, the second highest contribution in the world after the United States, which demonstrates that our commitment to democracy and open societies remains steadfast. In that context, the Prime Minister and I both recognise the need to increase defence spending. But before we make that commitment, it's necessary to revise and update the integrated review written as it was before the Ukraine invasion. And I've asked for that vital work to be completed ahead of the next budget, and today confirm we will continue to maintain the defence budget at least 2% of GDP to be consistent with our NATO commitment. Another important international commitment is to overseas aid. The OBR's forecasts show a significant shock to public finances, so it won't be possible to return to the 0.7% target until the fiscal situation allows. We remain fully committed to that target, and the plans that I've set out today assume that ODA spending will remain around 0.5% for the forecast period, As a percentage of GNI, we were the third highest donor in the G7 last year, and I am proud our aid commitment has saved thousands of lives around the world. So I look forward to working closely with my right honourable friend, the member for Sutton Coldfield, now rightly back in his place in Cabinet, to make sure we continue to play a leadership role in tackling global poverty. The United Kingdom has also been a global leader on climate change, cutting emissions by more than any other G20 country. But with the existential vulnerability we face, now would be the wrong time to step back from our international climate responsibilities. So I also confirm that despite the economic pressures, we remain fully committed to the historic Glasgow Climate Pact agreed at COP26, including a 68% reduction in our own emissions by 2030. I turn to education. Mr. Speaker, being pro-education is being pro-growth. But providing our children with a good education is not just an economic mission, it's a moral mission, one to which my right honourable friend the Prime Minister has always been deeply committed. Thanks to the efforts of successive Conservative education secretaries, particularly my right honourable friends from Surrey Heath and from Bognor Regis, we have risen 9 places in the global league tables for maths and reading in the last 7 years. I still, however, have concerns that not all school leavers get the skills they need for a modern economy. But for the first time ever, this country has a Conservative education secretary who left school at 16 to become an apprentice and knows firsthand why good skills matter. There are many important initiatives in place, but as Chancellor, I want to know the answer to one simple question. Will every young person leave the education system with the skills they would get in Japan, Germany or Switzerland? So I've appointed Sir Michael Barber to advise me and my right honourable friend, the Education Secretary, on the implementation of our skills reform programme. As we raise the skill levels of our school leavers, I want also to ensure that even in an economic crisis, the improvement in school standards continues to accelerate. Some have suggested putting VAT on independent school fees as a way of increasing core funding for schools, which would raise about £1.7 billion. But according to certain estimates, that would result in up to 90,000 children from the independent sector switching to state schools, giving with one hand only to take away with another. So instead of being ideological, I'm going to be practical. Because we want school standards to continue to rise for every single child, we're going to do more than protect the school's budget. We're going to increase it. And I can announce today that next year and the year after, we will invest an extra £2.3 billion per annum in our schools. Our message to heads and teachers and classroom assistants is thank you for your brilliant work. We need it to continue, and in difficult economic circumstances, a Conservative government is investing more in the public service that defines all our futures. Mr. Speaker, the service we depend on more than any other is the NHS. As a former Health Secretary, I know how hard people are working on the front line and how much they're struggling after the pandemic. The biggest issues are workforce shortages and pressures in the social care sector. So today I address them both. On staff shortages, the former chair of the Health and Social Care Select Committee put forward a case for a long-term workforce plan. He even wrote a book about it, which I've read. I've listened carefully to his proposals, and I believe £1.7 billion the year after, combined with savings from the delayed Dilnot reforms and more council tax flexibilities, this means an increase in funding available for the social care sector of up to £2.8 billion next year and £4.7 billion the year after. That's a big increase, But how we look after our most vulnerable citizens is not just a practical issue. It speaks to our values as a society. So today's decision will allow the social care system to deliver an estimated 200,000 more care packages over the next 2 years, the biggest increase in funding under any government of any colour in history. The NHS budget has been increased to record levels to deal with the pandemic. And today I'm asking the NHS to join all public services in tackling waste and inefficiency. We want Scandinavian quality alongside Singaporean efficiency, both better outcomes for citizens and better value for taxpayers. That does not mean asking people on the front line, often exhausted and burned out, to work harder, which would not be possible or fair. But it does mean asking challenging questions about how to reform all our public services for the better. So with respect to the NHS, I've asked former Health Secretary and Chair of the Norfolk and Waveney Integrated Care System, Patricia Hewitt. Schools in Scotland, the NHS and schools in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland face equivalent pressures. So the Barnett consequentials of today's decisions mean an extra £1.5 billion for the Scottish Government, £1.2 billion for the Welsh Government, £650 million for the Northern Ireland Executive. That is more resources for the schools and hospitals in our devolved nations next year, the year after, and every year thereafter. Mr. Speaker, our support for public services means that despite needing to find £55 billion in savings and tax rises, we are protecting the amount going into public services in real terms over the 5-year period. But if we're going to sustain our public services and avoid a doom loop of ever higher taxes and ever lower dynamism, we need economic growth. So I now turn, well, they've never been interested in growth, but we on this side of the House
I want to get to the end of the budget statement like the rest of the people of this country. Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So let's start with a difficult message for the party opposite. You cannot borrow your way to growth. Sound money is the rock. Sound money is the rock upon which long-term prosperity rests. But it isn't enough on its own. Our plan is designed to build a high-wage, high-skill economy that leads to long-term prosperity. In his May's lecture, my right honourable friend the Prime Minister identified the keys to doing this: people, capital and ideas. Today's increase in the education budget demonstrates our commitment to people and skills. And I now outline 3 further growth priorities: energy, infrastructure and innovation. Cheap, low-carbon, reliable energy must sit at the heart of any modern economy. But Putin's weaponisation of international gas prices has helped drive the cost of our national energy consumption right up. This year we'll be spending an extra £150 billion on energy compared to pre-pandemic levels, equivalent to paying for an entire second NHS through our energy bills. In 2019, a third of global emissions came from energy supply. So unless we act radically to change our approach, we'll both bankrupt our economy and harm our planet. Over the long term, there's only one way to stop ourselves being at the mercy of international gas prices: energy independence combined with energy efficiency. Energy independence, so neither Putin nor anyone else can use energy to blackmail us, and energy efficiency to reduce demand and climate impact as much as possible. Now, Britain is a global leader in renewable energy. Last year, nearly 40% of our electricity came from offshore wind, solar and other renewables. Since 2010, our renewable energy production has grown faster than any other large country in Europe. But we need to go even further with a major acceleration of homegrown technologies like offshore wind, carbon capture and storage, and above all, nuclear. This will deliver new jobs, industries and export opportunities and secure the clean, affordable energy we need to power our future economy and reach net zero. So today I can announce the government will proceed with a new nuclear power plant at Sizewell C. Subject to final government approvals, the contracts for the initial investment will be signed to remove the single biggest driver of inflation and volatility facing British businesses and consumers. So my right honourable friend, the Business and Energy Secretary, will publish further details on our energy independence plans and launch a new energy efficiency task force shortly. Mr. Speaker, if a modern economy needs secure, clean and affordable energy, it also needs good roads, rail, broadband and 5G infrastructure. Such connections matter because they allow wealth and opportunity to spread to every corner of the country. And that is why infrastructure is our second growth priority. Thanks to decisions by this Conservative government, right now workers right across the country are building or maintaining thousands of miles of roads and railways, installing mobile masts and broadband cables to connect the remotest parts of rural Britain, building and repairing hospitals and constructing new wind turbines in the North Sea. When looking for cuts, capital is sometimes seen as an easy option, but doing so limits not our budgets, but our future. So today I can announce that I'm not cutting a penny from our capital budgets in the next 2 years and maintaining them at that level in cash terms for the following 3 years. That means that although we're not growing our capital budget as planned, it will still increase from £63 billion 4 years ago to £114 billion next year, £115 billion the year after, and remain at that level, more than double what it was under the last Labour government. Smart countries build on their long-term commitments rather than discard them. So today I confirm that because of this decision, alongside Sizewell C, we will deliver the core Northern Powerhouse Rail, HS2 to Manchester, and East-West Rail, and the new hospitals programme, and gigabit broadband rollout. All these and more will be funded as promised, with over £600 billion of investment over the next 5 years to connect our country and grow our economy. Our National Conservative mission is to level up economic opportunity across the country. And that too needs investment in infrastructure. So I will also proceed with round 2 of the Levelling Up Fund, at least matching the £1.7 billion value of round 1. We'll also drive growth across the UK by working with the Scottish Government on the feasibility study for the A75, supporting the Advanced Technology Research Centre in Wales and funding a trade and investment event in Northern Ireland next year. But to unlock growth right across the country, we need to make it easier for local leaders to make things happen without banging on a Whitehall door. Our brilliant mayors, like Andy Street and Ben Houchin, have shown the power of civic entrepreneurship. We need more of this inspirational of the former Chancellor George Osborne, my right honourable friend from Tunbridge Wells, and my honourable friend the Science Minister and member for Mid Norfolk, for laying the vital foundations to make this possible. 21st century economies will be defined by new developments in artificial intelligence, quantum technologies and robotics. But we need to be better at turning world-class innovation into world-class companies. So as a former entrepreneur, I had to get that in somewhere, I want to combine our technology and science brilliance with our formidable financial services to turn Britain into the world's next Silicon Valley. We learned from the success of Nigel Lawson's Big Bang in 1986 that smart regulatory reform can spur investment from all over the world. So today, using our Brexit freedoms, I confirm the next steps in our supply-side transformation. By the end of next year, we will decide and announce changes to EU regulations in our 5 growth industries: digital, life sciences, green industries, financial services and advanced manufacturing. And I've asked the Chief Scientific Officer, Sir Patrick Vallance, who did such a brilliant job in the pandemic, to lead our work on how to do this. The second lesson of Nigel Lawson's Big Bang is the most important driver of global success is not tax subsidies, but competition. So we will legislate to give the Digital Markets Unit new powers to challenge monopolies and increase the competitive pressure to innovate. To further spur competition, I've listened to requests from businesses, and today I'm removing import tariffs on over 100 goods used by UK businesses in their production processes, from car seat parts to bicycle frames. I'll also change our approach to investment zones, which will now focus on leveraging our research strengths by being centred on universities in left-behind areas to help build clusters for our new growth industries. My Right Honourable friend, the Levelling Up Secretary, will work with mayors, devolved administrations and local partners to achieve this, with the first decisions announced ahead of the spring budget. I've heard some speculation that we might cut the research and development budget today, but I believe that would be a profound mistake. In our 2017 manifesto, we announced a target to invest 2.4% of our GDP in R&D, and the latest ONS data suggests the UK is close to meeting decisions in 2010 that we could afford record funding increases for the NHS, the landmark furlough scheme, and now the energy price guarantee. Today, the discipline that we've shown means we can provide targeted support to help our most vulnerable citizens with the cost of living. One of the biggest worries for families is energy bills, and I pay tribute to my predecessor, the Right Honourable Member for Spelthorne, and the former Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Member for South West Norfolk, for their leadership in this area. This winter, we will stick with their plan to spend £55 billion to help households and businesses with their energy bills, one of the largest support plans in Europe. From April, we'll continue the energy price guarantee for a further 12 months at a higher level of £3,000 per year for the average household. With prices forecast to remain elevated throughout next year, this will mean an average of £500 support for every household in the country. At the same time, for the most vulnerable, we'll introduce additional cost of living payments next year of £900 to households on means-tested benefits, £300 to pensioner households, and £150 for individuals on disability benefit. We'll also provide an additional £1 billion of funding to enable a further 12-month extension to the Household Support Fund, helping local authorities to assist those who might otherwise fall through the cracks. And for those households who use alternative fuels, such as heating oil and LPG to heat their homes, I'm today doubling the amount of support from £100 to £200, which will be delivered as soon as possible this winter. And before the end of the year, we'll also bring forward a new targeted approach to support businesses from next April. But I want to go further to support people most exposed to high inflation. Around 4 million families live in the social rented sector, almost 1/5 of households in England. Their rents are set at 1% above the September inflation rate, which means that... Mr. Speaker, there have also been some representations to keep the uplift to working age and disability benefits below the level of inflation, given the financial constraints we face. But that would not be consistent with our commitment to protect the most vulnerable. So today I also commit to uprate such benefits by inflation with an increase of 10.1%. That is an expensive commitment costing £11 billion, but it means 10 million working-age families will see a much-needed increase next year, which speaks to our priorities as a government and our priorities as a nation. On average, a family on universal credit will benefit next year by around £600, and to increase the number of households who can benefit from this decision, I'll also exceptionally increase the benefit cap with inflation next year. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I've talked a lot about British values of compassion, hard work, dignity, fairness. There is no more British value than our commitment to protect and honour those who built the country we live in. Yeah. So to support the poorest pensioners, I have decided to increase the pension credit by 10.1%, which is worth up to £1,470 for a couple and £960 for a single pensioner in our most vulnerable households. But the cost of living crisis is harming not just our poorest pensioners, but all pensioners. So because we've taken difficult decisions elsewhere today, I can also announce that we will fulfil our pledge to the country to protect the pensions triple lock. In April, the state pension will increase in line with inflation, an £870 increase, which represents the biggest ever increase in the state pension. And to the millions of pensioners who will benefit from this measure, I say now and always, this government is on your side. Mr. Speaker, there is a global energy crisis, a global inflation crisis, and a global economic crisis. But the British people are tough, inventive, and resourceful. We have risen to bigger challenges before. We aren't immune to these headwinds, but with this plan for stability, growth, and public services, we will face into the storm. There may be a recession made in Russia, but there is a recovery made in Britain. And we commit to our plan today with British resilience and British compassion. Because of the difficult decisions we take today, we strengthen our public finances, bring down inflation, protect jobs. We build the first state-backed nuclear power station for 30 years. We continue the biggest programme of capital investment for 40 years. We protect standards in schools, cut NHS waiting times, fund social care, cap energy bills, support those on benefits. We protect workers with the biggest ever increase in the national living wage, and our pensioners on the triple lock with the biggest ever increase in the state pension. This is a balanced plan for stability, a plan for growth, and a plan for public services. It shows that you don't need to choose either a strong economy or good public services. With Conservatives, and only with Conservatives, you get both. And I commend this statement to the House.
I now call the Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Chancellor for that statement.
Circuit for the Reuters live service. This is the primary audio circuit for the Reuters live service. This is the primary audio circuit for the Reuters live service. This is the primary audio circuit for the Reuters live service. This is the primary audio circuit for the Reuters live service. This is the primary audio circuit for the Reuters live service. This is the primary audio circuit for the Reuters live service. This is the primary audio circuit for the Reuters live service.
สวัสดีครับสวัสดีครับเช็ค1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9สวัสดีครับสวัสดีครับเช็ค1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9สวัสดีครับสวัสดีครับเช็ค1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9โพเดียม2นะครับโพเดียม2นะครับครับเช็ค1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9สวัสดีครับสวัสดีครับเช็คสัญญาณครับ1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9สวัสดีครับสวัสดีครับเช็คสัญญาณครับ1 2 3 4 5 6เช็คสัญญาณครับ1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9สวัสดีครับสวัสดีครับ1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9สวัสดีครับสวัสดีครับสวัสดีครับเช็ค1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 0เช็คสวัสดีครับสวัสดีครับสวัสดีครับเช็ค1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9สวัสดีครับสวัสดีครับเช็ค1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 0เช็คสวัสดีครับสวัสดีครับสวัสดีครับฮัลโหลเช็ค1 2 3 4 5 6 5 8เคลียร์ไหมครับ